Good evening. Tonight we conclude this series, and we're going to address the question tonight: how much control do we have over our emotions? How much say do we have as far as which direction our emotions go? Can we decide to love somebody or not to love somebody? Can we decide to stop loving somebody? Is love something that is merely a reaction, an impulse, an instinct that we have no say in whatsoever? That there are some people we love and some we don't. Some things we love and some we don't. And it's just a matter of who we are, how we're made up, our natural instinct, and we have no say in it? Or is it something that we could actually have input in? That we could decide to love somebody, determine that we're going to love something, make ourselves love. Is it a voluntary thing or is it involuntary? Is it a reaction or is it something that we can initiate? Do we have input into our love? That's the question that we're going to examine tonight. And there's one place where the Kabbalists deal with this question directly, and that's because there is an indication from the Torah itself that there's a very clear answer to this question. Whether or not we can control our love or is something that the Torah seems to address directly and answer clearly. What does the Torah say about love and our control of love? Where does the answer to this question appear in the Torah? Anyone want to guess?
The beginning?
In the beginning? Fair guess. Adam and Eve. Any hint? Yeah, not bad. Well, let's think about it like this. Is there anywhere where love is commanded to us? A commandment of love. What does that say? Love the Lord your God. And love your neighbor. So there's two examples of a commandment to love. So in both cases we can ask the question, how can you command an emotion? How can you tell somebody to love? How can you have a commandment that you're told thou shalt love? Isn't love something that either comes or doesn't come? Do we have such control over it that we can decide we're going to love, and we do? If you cannot control this emotion, if it's an emotion that comes spontaneously, so then there's no place to command it. No one can tell somebody else to love. If we can control it, then you can. The question is, can you indeed control your emotion of love? Is it something that you can switch on? So the Torah commands you, love God. What if I don't? What if I don't particularly love God? So what should I do now? Well, the commandment says to love him, so I've got to love him. How? What do you want me to do about it? Like, if I don't, I don't. Could somebody tell you, love this person? Here's a person, I want to introduce you to somebody and I want you to love them. What would you say to that? I can't make any promises. I'll do my best. I'll try, it might work out, but you can't tell me thou shalt love. You can't command an emotion.
A parent tells its siblings, to the children, to love its sibling. Mm-hmm. Love your brother.
Right.
Love your sibling.
Why? And what's the backing of that? What? How can you tell the sibling to love their brother? Because. Well, that itself indicates its own impossibility. If you need to be told to love somebody, then you can't. Isn't that what it is? If you need to be told, if you need to be instructed, you should love this person, or you should love God. Well, if I need to be told, obviously I don't love them. And if I don't love them, you telling me to love them is not going to make a difference. I can't just magically, abracadabra, start loving.
It says, כבד את אביך ואת אמך. So why doesn't it say why doesn't it say love your father and mother? Why does it just say respect your father and mother?
Good question. Must mean that there's not a particular commandment to love. You have to love your fellow, which includes your parents. There's not a special commandment to love your parents. It's to honor your parents. It's a separate thing. But loving, we're commanded to love everybody. Love your fellow. Excuse me. Thank you.
Love your
There's
children.
different forms of love, and that's perhaps where the mind becomes involved, because love takes different forms.
Okay. And so there are forms that we can control and forms that we can't? Is that what you mean? That there are some love is impulsive, other love is developed.
The love one has for a friend or for a husband or for a child, it's different.
Yeah.
But for parents, for a child, is definitely involved. The moment you set eyes on the child, whatever it looks like, you love that child. Or one would like to think when everyone would like it.
Okay, so there are some loves that
That's it.
you don't need to work on, but others it seems that you do. To love anybody, to love your neighbor,
Takes work.
to love God, these things, if you have to be told it, then that itself means that there's something missing. So there's no commandment to love your parents. It's to honor your parents. There's no commandment to love your kids, because that wouldn't seem to be necessary. But there is a commandment to love your fellow, which includes everybody. And there's also a commandment to love God. But if you need to be told, then that means there's not love. And if there's not love, being told is not going to make a difference. You can't tell somebody, thou shalt love, it would seem. Some beings you love, some you don't. Some neighbours you love, some you don't. I mean, how can you love everybody?
Because you have to work it.
So you have to work on it. How? What should I do to work on it? How can I work on love?
You're going to be committed to the act of loving.
And will that mean that I will love?
Well, it's like, if you're sad and you say smile. And even if you don't feel like smiling, you smile and you feel better. Like love, well, you don't really feel like, but if you were committed, you say.
So does that mean it's really possible to love anybody?
Virtually. Israel's got it right now.
Could you love anybody, really, if you tried? Is that what it's saying? Is love so in our hands that if you worked hard enough, you tried hard enough, you'd be able to love absolutely anybody?
You could dig deep down.
So that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. That you could love anybody. That there are some people maybe who are easier to love. It comes a bit naturally to you. There are other people that might make it a bit difficult. But if you would work on it hard enough, you'd be able to love them as well. You could love anybody. Which implies that love is in our control. It is in our hands. It's something that we can reach. We can attain it. It must be that way, because if the Torah commands you to love your fellow, it must be possible. There's a principle that the Torah does not command us something that can't be done, that's impossible. And so therefore, if it's commanded, it must be possible. So it means neighbor, even your neighbor, even that one, you could love them. You can do it, and that's why you're told to do it.
So from what he's saying, could you love Adolf Hitler?
Could you?
I don't think I could love him, but I don't think I could love him, no.
So there are limitations to the commandment loving your neighbor. Because the Torah doesn't say love everybody. It actually doesn't say that. It says love your neighbor. And so one of the understandings of that is neighbor means somebody who is behaving as a neighbor, meaning somebody who is still within the realm of humanity. There are certain people who do go out of that category in certain extreme examples. But here we're not talking about extremes. We're talking about everyday life. We're talking about the people that we mix with all the time. Are we able to love them all? So let's say it's possible, in theory, we still have to back this up, we still have to prove it, but let's say it's possible to love anybody if you work hard enough. And God as well. Is it possible to love God? Anyone can love God, even if you're not in the mood, even if you don't really appreciate what that means. Again, there's a commandment to love God.
Is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Shema it says that love the Lord your God with all your heart. So if we're told to do it,
But
must mean it's possible.
Who says to do that?
God.
Did God say you must love me, or did some religious guy say, write it down and say you must love God?
No, it's a commandment. That's what the Torah is. God's telling you. This
So
is
it
one of
was
the commandments.
From God's word
Yeah,
or
yeah.
man's written word?
That's God's word. That's the idea.
It says you must love me.
Correct.
Okay.
Which sounds a bit unreasonable to tell someone you have to love and you have to love me. Is it possible or not? This question is asked by one of the great Kabbalists, Nachmanides, known as the Ramban. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, his name was. He was a Spanish Kabbalist from the 11th century. And he asked this very question. How can the Torah give a commandment to love God? How can you command any emotion? An emotion comes or doesn't come. There are some people who love God, some people who might not. How can we all be told to love God as if it's something that's attainable by anybody? If we're told that, then we must be able to love. But how? What are you supposed to do? And Nachmanides answers a fascinating answer. He says that indeed you cannot work on an emotion. An emotion cannot be directly worked on. An emotion is indeed a reaction to your surroundings, and there's nothing you can do to work on an emotion. However, Nachmanides says, while emotion cannot be worked on, your mind, your mindset, your philosophy, your attitude can always be worked on. That is in your control. Your emotional reaction to a person or a thing or an object or a concept, that is not in your control. Emotions just react in a certain way. There are certain things you love, certain things you don't. However, your intellectual outlook, your mind, you can control. And therefore, says Nachmanides, you cannot just decide to love something or somebody. That you can't do. But what you can decide to do is meditate on the goodness of that person or that being, to think and appreciate what they are, what they represent, and how good they are. And that will lead to love. Because when you appreciate in your mind the goodness of a person, that will lead to the emotion of love. So again, you can't just decide to love something or somebody, but you can meditate on their goodness, you can appreciate how good they are in your mind, and when that becomes clear in your mind, it will lead to an emotion of love. Because we love that which is good in our eyes. And so therefore, says Nachmanides, when the commandment says, love the Lord your God, what it's really commanding is the mind, not the heart. It's not telling your heart to love. You can't tell a heart to love. It's telling your mind to develop an appreciation of God. Meditate on the fact that God gave you life, gave you sustenance, gave you existence, and is the source of your everything. When you appreciate that, you will come to love. Because you cannot not love a being that has given you everything. So the commandment, therefore, is an intellectual commandment, not an emotional commandment. That's Nachmanides' explanation. Now this is interesting, because that seems to be implying that our emotions are intertwined with our intellect. Our intellectual, theoretical, academic view of the world, that will shape our emotional reaction to the world. What you understand with your mind will lead and direct your heart to feel a certain way. That's what he's saying. When your mind understands the goodness of something, your heart loves it. And so Nachmanides in this teaching is giving us a connection between mind and heart, and saying that there is a way to direct the heart, the emotions, and that is by not facing the emotions directly, but by going to the mind. Now this This needs to be explored, because that's a fascinating theory. The idea that our emotions can actually be directed, manipulated, developed according to the way we think, that our minds can direct our emotion, is a fascinating idea. On the surface, it doesn't seem that way. At first glance, it doesn't seem that emotions have much to do with intellect. In fact, if we analyze emotion and intellect, we find that they're two very opposite realms. Not just different realms, but opposite. The way the mind works and the way the heart works, the way intellect functions and emotions work, they're so different, they're actually polar opposites. Intellect, our intellectual experience of something, means an objective, removed analysis and observation of the thing. Our emotional experience of something is the exact opposite, a subjective, involved experience of the thing. Intellect is removed and objective, emotion is involved and subjective. What do I mean? Imagine a person who's extremely intellectual, an intellectual type, somebody who is in the world of ideas. Such a person inevitably is a person who is analytical and removed, a little cold. Someone who's extremely intellectual is somebody who observes the world around them, but from a bit of a distance. They see things as ideas, as concepts, and a concept is a cold fact. It's an observer of the world. That's an intellectual person, as opposed to an emotional type. Somebody who is a very emotional person. What does it mean? What do we mean when we say somebody's very emotional? We mean that they react to things. They get involved with things. They take things personally. They take things to heart. They're not removed, they're involved. Right? So, like an intellectual person who listens to a lecture like this, an intellectual will sit back and hear ideas. And will come out having experienced and heard a list of ideas and interesting thoughts. That's an intellectual type. That intellectual may never apply any of those thoughts to themselves. Never take it personally. It's not about me, it's about ideas. An emotional person, on the other hand, whatever they hear, whatever they listen to, they take it to themselves, they take it personally. It's about me. And therefore they react to it. An intellectual can sit back and say, interesting. And they might agree or might disagree, but it's just facts and ideas. An emotional person cannot sit back, they have to react. There's something going on here that you're talking about me. So either I like it or I dislike it. They're going to have an emotional reaction to everything they hear. Some things they hear will make them angry and upset. Others, they will smile and it'll give them pleasure. They like it, they dislike it. But there's more than just an opinion, there's a reaction to it.
You can't have an intellectual, intellectual person.
Sorry?
It's not possible to have an intellectual, emotional person.
An intellectual, emotional person?
Or emotional.
There are some people who are more balanced. In other words, they have a strong intellectual power as well as being in touch with their emotion. There are some people like that. Everyone, of course, has both. Every one of us has intellect and emotion. But most of us will tend one way or the other. Some people are extreme. And I'm obviously illustrating an extreme example. An extreme example of intellectual is somebody who hears ideas and takes it not personally at all. It's purely ideas. So you could to a true intellectual, you could insult them. And they'll say, that's an interesting point of view. I'll have to think about that. And they'll think about it. And then they'll, so you told them that, I think you're a complete idiot. So really? I'll get back to you on that. I'll think about it. And I say, I thought about it and I can't agree. I don't think I am an idiot, but I'm willing to hear your. If you have backing for it, I'd like to hear. It's purely intellectual. There's nothing taken personally whatsoever. That's an extreme intellectual. A very emotional person. You didn't even say they were an idiot. All you said is, I don't know if I agree with you. I say, you call me an idiot? you think I'm foolish? Because all you said is I don't agree. I didn't say anything about you. But an extremely emotional person is all upset at you, and they won't speak to you for a week now. And you don't know why. What did I do? I didn't say anything about you. I didn't mention your name. And they take it personally. That's an emotional person. There's an emotional reaction. Again, in the extreme, living with an emotional person, that's what's going to happen. Extremes. The reaction is going to be immediate. And you can't explain yourself to an emotional person either. Because explaining is intellect. This is emotion. So you're coming and saying, no, hang on, what I said was, and that just makes them more upset. now you think I'm such an idiot, you need to explain what you said, and it's not going to help. Intellect can't talk to emotion. And we all know this. I'm illustrating two people, but the same person. There's one person. Each one of us are sometimes in a more intellectual state, and sometimes in a more emotional state. When we're upset about something has got us upset. So if somebody comes and tries to rationalize, there's nothing more frustrating than that. There's nothing more annoying than somebody rationalizing your pain or your upset. Somebody coming in and explaining it away. Don't give me explanations. Like God forbid somebody who's suffering mourning, has suffered a loss. So when you come up to somebody who suffered a loss and say, well, they had a good long life, that's not what we're talking about. I'm feeling pain now, and you're justifying and saying it was, that's not the appropriate thing. Now I'm feeling an emotion, and so to come with intellectual explanations to rationalize a tragedy or pain, it's not the time. There are other times when we are intellectual and we're willing to listen to a thought, an idea. We're in an intellectual state, but you have to get it right at the right time. So each one of us tends slightly this way or slightly that way. Some people are slightly more intellectual and therefore a little bit more cold and removed and able to be objective. Others a little bit more emotional and therefore quite involved and connected and less able to be objective, more subjective. Subjective is where you are in the picture. Objective is you're out of the picture. Intellect is an observer. Whereas emotion is me, it's my feeling, it's my reaction to it. So these are very opposite characteristics, they're very opposite functions in our personality. Just like two people like that, extreme intellectual and extreme emotional, are two very opposite beings. And it can be quite comical when they're put in a room together to have a conversation. An extremely intellectual person with a very emotional person. It's like they're talking two languages. And so to say that intellect and emotion can actually relate to each other within ourselves, to say that intellect can direct, influence, and shape emotion is quite a strange thought. To say that our intellectual view of things can influence our emotions and direct them correctly, as the Ramban Nachmanides does suggest, that if we're told to love God, what does that mean? It means to think, contemplate, meditate in your mind on God's kindness, on the life that He's given you, on the gift that He's given you. And when you think about that in your mind, intellectually, so then that will cause you to emotionally love Him, because we love that which is good to us. That which we perceive in our mind as good, we emotionally react to with love. Well, that's a very novel thought. That's quite a revolutionary idea, that your mind can arouse an emotion. Surely it's the opposite. Don't we see all the time that your mind thinks one thing and your heart tells you something else? It seems very often that we know in our mind what should be, but our heart is otherwise. So our mind is aware, for example, that we're in a relationship that is not good for us. Our mind knows it, but our heart draws us to that relationship. We know that we shouldn't be getting involved with this person. In our mind knows it, but our heart is attracted. Or the opposite. In our mind, this person would be wonderful for us. There's everything there. Intellectually, in theory, on paper, they've got it all. They've got it all. And yet, our heart is not attracted to that person. They're a good person, a kind person, attractive, They've got all the qualities that we could possibly be looking for, and yet our heart is not there. And other times it's the exact opposite. They've got all the qualities that we should be avoiding, and we're crazy about them. Our heart draws us towards that person. We see all the time that heart and mind, emotion and intellect are two different universes that don't seem to get on necessarily. They seem quite opposite. So to say that our mind can influence emotion, can direct emotion, if you decide that this person is good in your mind, then your heart will come to love that person. You'll have an emotional bond to them. Doesn't seem correct. Intuitively, doesn't seem like the way it is. So the Kabbalists have an explanation for this phenomenon. The fact that intellect and emotion are indeed two different worlds, but there is a connecting bridge between them. There is a bridge that connects intellect and emotion, and therefore, even though for much of the time, much of our lives, we may live in a way that our intellect and our emotion, our feelings and our thoughts are in two different worlds, but we have the capacity, the ability to link the two to the point where, in actual fact, intellect and emotion do have a direct relationship. Whether we control that or not is up to us, but at all times, in all situations, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, our emotions will be shaped by our intellect. Our feelings will be based on our attitude, our awareness, our understanding. And we have a choice to either control that process or just let it happen, but it is always the case. The way the Kabbalists describe this is through a third intellectual faculty called Da'at. We've described in the past the first two of the three intellectual faculties, Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina are the conceptualization of an idea, where the idea hits you, you discover it. Bina is the comprehension and development of the idea, where you go through the details, you get to know the idea. Or with a person, Chachma is where you discover a person, you realize there's another person out there, there's another being, a real other human being that is not you. You discover somebody. That's the excitement of discovery of another person. Bina is getting to know that person. Not your picture of them, but how they are. So this process of Chachma Bina we've described at length as being the intellectual realization and awareness of another concept, a being, whatever it is. Now that is purely intellectual. There's still a third level of intellect, and that's called Da'at. Da'at is called, in Kabbalistic writings, the key to emotion. Da'at is the third intellectual capacity, the third faculty of the mind, that takes an idea and makes it so real to you that you can react to it. Or takes the awareness and knowledge of a person and makes that person into such a real being that you then form an emotional opinion of that person, of liking them or disliking them, of going towards them or away from them. What does this mean? Intellect on its own will not necessarily dictate an emotion. Just knowing about something will not always lead to an emotional reaction to it. Because intellect, because it's objective and removed, that's its nature. So objective and removed means not involved, means apart and separate. Emotion means involved. So knowing something and feeling something towards that thing are two very different experiences. And therefore, we can know something but not emotionally react to it. An example would be where we know intellectually that something is bad for us. That there's a certain food that we eat that we really like, but we know what that food does to us. We know that it's bad for us, and we know that it brings on bad things, and we really shouldn't be eating this food. We're aware of that in our mind. But that's not enough to stop us liking the food and wanting to eat it and eating it. And so we continue to eat it. Why? If you know it's bad for you, why would you do it? The answer is that you don't really know it's bad for you. You are aware on some level that it's bad for you, but you don't really know it's bad for you. If you really know that it's bad for you, you would not go anywhere near it. Because in intellect, there's a level of knowing something as a piece of information, as a theory, and then there's a deeper level of knowing something where you really know it. It's a fact, it's a reality. It's a different experience. When will you realize? When will it become a real fact? Maybe when you get sick. Maybe when your bad diet leads you to sickness, and then you see with your own eyes palpably this is the effect of it. It's no longer a concept in your mind. It's no longer a theory in a book. It's no longer something you read somewhere. It's a reality. When it becomes a reality, then you know it. Before you thought you knew it. You didn't know it. You were aware of it intellectually, but now you know it. You see it. It's right there. That's when you start to react and you say, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to have this. That's when it becomes real. We know many things are right and wrong in our mind, but we don't have an emotional passion about it, and so therefore we don't react to it. And so you could even lecture and speak about an idea that doesn't really hit home for you. You don't really take it personally. Why? Because you know it as information, but it's not so real that it applies to you. The power of da'at, the third faculty of the mind, is the power to take an idea and to bring it to yourself, to make it so real that it hits you. That it's no longer just a theory out there, but it's now an idea that I've really connected to. It's an intellectual power of connection. And so that's why da'at is the middle ground between intellect and emotion. On the one hand, da'at is an intellectual capacity, but it's the intellectual capacity to connect to an idea, where an idea becomes personal. It sinks in. And at that stage, when it becomes personal, you can react to it emotionally. You start to lose your objectivity and you become subjective about it. So da'at is described as this doorway that links intellect and emotion. Interestingly, of the three intellectual capacities, da'at is the one that takes the most work. We naturally conceptualize ideas. Some people have stronger intellects than others, but we're always taking in ideas and thoughts. But to take it personally, for some people, that is a huge effort. Again, when we described earlier the intellectual, what do I mean by the intellectual? The intellectual means somebody who, their chachma and bina are very strong. They can conceptualize and comprehend ideas very well. But their da'at may be lacking. They don't take ideas personally. They don't ingest it. They don't take it in to the point where they'll emotionally react. It remains in the realm of intellect. And so therefore they remain safely removed from it. That's an intellectual person. An emotional person is not somebody who lacks intellect. An emotional person is somebody whose da'at is very free, very open. As soon as something hits their mind, it immediately goes to intellect. To emotion. And they react to it emotionally. As soon as they've understood, they've become aware of something, instead of slowing it down in the mind stage, it goes immediately to emotion and they react to it. That's what emotional person means. All of the information, everything that we receive, everything we experience is first filtered through the mind and then goes to the heart. You first become aware of something intellectually as a thing outside of you. It then becomes something inside of you that you react to. Everything goes through chachma, bina, da'at, and then to emotion. Everything. For everybody. The difference is, for some people that's a slow process. For some people it's a quick process. For some people it gets stuck somewhere along the way. And for other people it slides all the way through instantaneously. So in other words, some people make very quick emotional reaction, maybe before they've really understood what they're reacting to. They don't yet really know what they're talking about, but they're very quickly reacting to it. Some people, the exact opposite. They spend so much time analyzing, so much time observing, they never get around to any emotion. It remains so removed, so quarantined from them, that they have it in their mind, but it never comes down into their heart. That's again the extreme. And then most of us come somewhere in between, where we have a little bit of intellect, a little bit of emotion, a bit stronger here, a bit stronger there. What's the ideal? What's the best way to be? So surely the best way to be is to have a balance where we allow intellect to sink in, and then we choose how to direct the emotion. We allow the dart where it's appropriate, and somewhere and where it's not appropriate, we keep it closed. Dart is like a door that doesn't have to be opened up. Not everything do we have to react to. Not everything we hear do we have to become emotionally involved with. We can keep it closed. But to be able to keep it closed but know when to open it is a very tricky thing. You know, we today are bombarded with information, constantly bombarded with information, much more than any generation before us. And the news that we hear on a daily basis, we hear more cataclysmic world events in one day than most people generations ago would hear in a lifetime. And we hear the details of it and see pictures of it. Now think about it. If we would actually be normal people, watching what's going on in the news, today in Israel or wherever, so how would we be sitting here now? How can we sit here when we know what's going on in the world? Where we see there are people being killed and maimed, and there's stuff going on in the world that we've seen it, we witnessed it. Think about how we live. We watch these things as we're eating breakfast. Like we say, can you please pass the salt? As somebody is being killed in front of us. Like, it's a bizarre existence that we have. How do we do this? How do we survive? You have a couple of minutes, you quickly check the headlines, and you see how many people killed, how many people this, that. It's just like another quick piece of news, and then back to work. How do we do this? How do we cope with such a thing? So the answer is, our dart is closed. We've developed a resistance to taking things too personally, and so you read a piece of news, and it remains a piece of news that you then switch off. You don't react emotionally to it. Imagine you did. Imagine if you reacted emotionally and personally to everything you read, every headline that you read. You'd be a wreck. You'd be an emotional wreck. You'd have to stop and think. Imagine you read that in somewhere in the middle of Indonesia there was a flood and there were 3,000 people that drowned. Terrible tragedy. You read that. Now, usually it's okay, that happened in Indonesia, and then you look at the next story. But imagine you would stop and say, okay, 1 second. Let's stop. 3,000. What's 3,000 people? And you started to think that through. What does 3,000 mean? And you try and think of the last time you were in the presence of 3,000 people. It's a lot of people. So you think about all this, and then you imagine drowning, and you meditate on what drowning means, the pain of what it means to drown. And you stopped and you thought, and people, there's men, women, children, family, and you stopped and you meditated and thought into what that actually meant, what you just read. And you had to think of the pain, but 3,000 times, not once, not one person, it's 3,000. And you meditated into that. Okay, and then you went to the next news story. You would not be able to move. You'd be completely depressed and broken. Wouldn't be possible. So what do? We read that headline, and then we move to the next one. We're closed. We're closed off from it. Now, the problem is that we've become so immune to it that it's not easy to open the dart sometimes. Everything becomes just another piece of news. It's just another number, a figure. And we can become completely desensitized to it. It's not easy to open dart when you've held it closed. In order not to be able to get on with our day, we've held back the emotion So you can't react so easily. For our own health, for our own survival, we've done that. But then the danger is, by doing that, when the dart is supposed to open and you're supposed to emotionally react to something, it might not be so easy. You'll still just see it as a piece of information. Yeah.
What comes with change more? Do you think intellect or emotion?
Sorry, what?
Change comes with, what do you think, with intellect or emotion?
You mean changing yourself? How?
No, just change in the world. Do you think it comes from intellect or emotion?
Well, intellect is the driver of change. In other words, you can only change your attitude, and that will change your emotional reaction.
I thought it was the other way around.
What
So
do you
with the Vietnam War, people got emotional, and they wrote songs, and they sat around and protested because they got very emotional about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they resisted police. So it's a protest. So I thought that change comes from emotion.
Okay, that's a different thing. Emotion is you. Emotion is you much more than intellect is you. Your emotional state, that which you love, that which you hate, the things that upset you, the things that make you happy, that's you. Your intellect is not so much you. That's more of a faculty that you have. It's a feature of your personality. And so your strength, your power, your energy is emotion, not intellect. An idea is just an idea. If an idea doesn't spur an emotion, so then it remains an idea in a book. It doesn't change the world. So of course emotion is what changes the world. But I thought you meant for you to change yourself. For that, your emotion is stuck, is as it is. What can change is your attitude. And when your attitude changes, your emotion can change. Why? Because what you like or what you don't like, what you fear and what you love, what excites you and what upsets you, all of these things are based on your perception of them. If you're scared of something, what are you scared of? It's not it, it's the way you understand it. It's the way you see it. Like the Kabbalists say an idea that if you look at fears are an interesting thing. Look at what a child is scared of. What are kids scared of? What are they scared of? Ghosts, boogeymen, the dark. You know, these things are scary.
Parents.
Yeah, parents. They're often scared of things that don't have any substance, don't have any existence, and aren't even real. But a little kid would not be scared of a machine gun. A machine gun is not a scary thing for a little kid. Like, why should it be? What do kids get excited about? They get excited about lollies and toys. If you would give a little kid a choice between a $100 note or a handful of chocolate and lollies, what would they choose? The lollies. The fact that you can buy much more lollies with $100, that process they haven't developed, they haven't worked that out yet. And so they're not excited by money, they're excited by lollies and chocolates. That's what they're scared of, that's what they're excited by. When that same child grows, 5 years, 10 years later, so then if you would come with a handful of lollies, they'd say, what do you want from me? Like, they're not interested in that. By then, $100, that they'll go for. If you tell them there's a boogeyman under your bed, they say, thank you. You know, like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not their fear anymore. But then if they see a gun, or I don't know, or a big vicious person, or something, then they're scared of that. Their fears and their love, their excitement develops. Why does it change? What's changed? It's not that emotion is any different. There are emotions of love and fear, of excitement and passion and being upset. Those emotions have not changed. A child's excitement for a handful of lollies is just as emotionally energetic as a teenager's excitement for a new skateboard. It's the same emotional excitement. What's changed is their intellectual awareness, their sense of what's valuable, of what's good. That's an intellectual thing, not an emotional thing. Their emotions haven't actually changed. It's the same emotion, excitement, passion, but it's developed to something else. The fear that a child has of the boogeyman under the bed is the same as the fear of an older person of a robber that might break into the house. It's the same fear, it's just their awareness of what's really dangerous, of what's really scary has developed, has changed. And so therefore, it's our intellectual awareness of the world around us that will determine our emotional reaction to it. The things that we love, are excited by and chase after, the things we fear and we avoid, those things will all depend on what you think is good for you and what you think is bad for you. Which means, that's an amazing idea. It means that we do have a certain amount of control over our emotion, because we can control our attitude. Attitude can change. Emotion is very hard to change. When you're scared of something, for somebody to come and tell you, there's nothing to be scared of, that doesn't help. When you tell a 5-year-old kid, there's no such thing as a boogeyman, they don't exist, it doesn't help, because they can't comprehend in their world there is such a thing. Like, you can't just explain to them there isn't. It's been scientifically proven that there is no boogeyman. There's no evidence whatsoever for it. It's not backed by any individual studies that there's a boogeyman. And it's been looked over the world. The whole world has been examined. In fact, beds throughout the world have been looked under, and no one has ever seen a boogeyman. So these are all facts. You can't argue with those facts. It's incontrovertible. It doesn't help. I'm scared. And the same applies to an adult who's scared. Those facts are not going to help. When you're in a state of emotion, those facts don't help. But facts will help when you can have a conversation. When somebody is not emotionally worked up, and you can talk to them and say, you know, and even a child, this will work. Not at night, but during the day. When you talk to them during the day and say, you know, under your bed, we can go and have a look, there's nothing there, and there's no real thing. That can help the child to develop a maturity and not be scared of that anymore. And they'll be scared of other things, more mature things. So the mind, the attitude of the mind will determine the direction of the heart. If you imagine like this, emotion is like this raw energy. Like, we have a power of love in our heart. The power to love is in our heart. But it is directionless. It is just to love. To love what? Well, I don't know. Just to love. I can love. My heart is ready to love. I want to love. I have the power to love. I'm looking what to love. And love is blind. Emotion is blind. It doesn't have any direction. It's waiting to be pointed. Our intellect, our mind, is what points emotion and says, this is what you should love. Our mind says, I've recognized something or somebody that is good, that has goodness, and goodness is something that should be loved, so therefore this is what you should love. And it's the power of dart that connects the thought, the mind that says this is good, to say this is good for me. That's the key. There's the Chachman Bina, the intellect, says this is good. Dart says this is good for me. I'm in the picture. I'm connected to this goodness. It's good for me. Therefore, the heart will say, I want it. I love it. I'm going to chase after that. Our heart could love anything and anyone, as long as the mind directed it that this is what's good for you, then that's where the heart will go. And so therefore, really, what we love is what we think is good for us. What we fear is what we think is bad for us. And that introduces an amazing possibility. It introduces the idea that we actually can redirect our emotions. Not when we're in a state of emotion, but in a state of calm. We can stop and become more aware of what's around us. And you can't love something that you're not aware of. You can't love somebody that you've never heard of. You can't have a feeling towards somebody, positive or negative, that you have no awareness of. You first have to be aware of someone, and then you can have a feeling towards them.
Can you love someone without meeting them?
You have to be aware of their existence. So we do all love someone without meeting them. We all love our fantasy. Our fantasy person, our imaginary person who we think we're looking for.
So God is
that we love.
So God
But that fantasy,
God is a fantasy then. You've never met him, you've never touched him, you've never spoken to him, had him for a cup of coffee, you never saw him walk across the road. So you're in love with a fantasy. Nothing short of it. I'm not saying that's bad.
yeah.
But it,
Look, it's an interesting thought. But
Get back to you.
and that's
But-
okay too.
no, but it's the other way around. We're God's fantasy. We are what God thought up. He thought us up. Like, what if I had a world with people in it? And that's all we are.
You make space.
We are characters in His mind, not the other way around. Think about that one. So, but what this idea it introduces a tantalizing thought, and that is that there could be people who are around us, who we know they exist on the level of chachma. We're aware that they exist. There may even be a bit of bina where we've got to know that person. But there's no dart, meaning the person has not become a reality in our lives to the point where we can emotionally connect to them. Meaning, we may have already certain preconceived ideas as to the type of person who we can love. We have a philosophy, a mindset, that this is the type of person that is for me. And what that means is that our emotional capacity is limited to that intellectual view. We're only going to see people emotionally, we're only going to see them if they fit into that view. If somebody does not fit into that view, so then they're actually emotionally non-existent for us. They're not an option for us. Our emotions cannot see that. Because an emotion cannot have a feeling towards something if your mind is not aware of it. And so too, you cannot have a feeling towards a person if your mind is not aware of that person. So if we have developed in our minds a very narrow definition of what love is, or what the person we could love should be, so that definition, we are going to be stuck to that. Like, we're going to be correct. You're not going to be able to love anyone other than that definition that you've created, because your mind will determine where your emotion can point. So you've got this amazing love in your heart, and that love could be unleashed on many different people, but only if your mind allows it. Only if your outlook has room for that person. If you don't have room for that person in your mind, so then your heart cannot possibly embrace that person. It's like they don't exist from an emotional perspective. Which means that it's possible that you're missing out on somebody. There could be somebody right there, right in front of you. You know them very well, sort of, but you don't really know them. You know Chachma Bina level. You know of their existence. You may know a lot about them, but they haven't become real enough for you that they're actually an option to love that person. And so, there's an emotional blindness towards that person. They're right there, but you're not open to them emotionally because they don't fit into your category that you've created, your list of requirements. And that could be tragic. You might be missing out on something amazing. The good news is that the possibility of love is totally available because you don't need to change your emotion. You need to change your thoughts. If you have to change your emotion, it'll be impossible. Some people love, some people I don't. Some people have feelings towards, some people I don't. So I've met somebody, nice person, but just feelings aren't there. If you would be in such a situation, my feelings are not there for this person. I don't have feelings for them. If someone would tell you, well, develop feelings, have feelings. You should have feelings. Get feelings for that person. Love them already. If you look, that they've got everything that's needed. So just love that person. If that would be what the advice would be, then it would be hopeless. I'm sorry, you can't just tell me to love. You can't do that. There's no button to press that causes an emotion. You can't just develop love just like that. If I don't love, I don't. But the good news is that you don't have to do that. What you could be able to do is change your attitude, change your perspective of that person. That it could be that the reason why you're not loving them is because there's something in your mind, in your philosophy, in your attitude that has blocked you from loving that person. is not allowing you to love that person. You've decided long ago that the person you can love has to be A, B, and C, and this person is not. And so therefore it's your mind that's not letting you love, not your heart. And that can be changed. Your perspective could be broadened, and you could say, you know what? Do I really know that A, B, and C is what I need? How do I know? How do I know what I'm looking for? Until you've found what you're looking for, how are you supposed to know what it is? And so maybe those prerequisites that my mind has set, maybe they have to be thrown out the window. And I have to say that I'm going to give this person a chance. I'm going to be open and let them be who they are. Because I've seen and observed the goodness in that person. I've seen that they have amazing qualities. I know that in my mind. So what's stopping me from having feeling? Possibly, it's actually my limited, my narrow view of what love should be, of who I should be loving. And so by getting that out of the way, the person can materialize out of their nothingness. And they were emotionally non-existent for you because they were outside of your parameter. As soon as you got rid of the parameters, then maybe they'll emotionally exist and a feeling can come. You can develop a feeling. That's an amazing thought. So Nachmanides says that this applies to our love of God. That our love of God is something that we naturally have. Our soul naturally loves, is attracted to, wants to be close to God. Every soul loves God. Just to activate that love, to feel that love, you have to remember who God is. By in your mind meditating on who God is, what it means, so then love will come naturally. That will automatically come. A similar idea is taught when it comes to loving a fellow human being. Loving here, I'm talking about neighborly love, brotherly love, not romantic love. To love your fellow human being, all you need to do is meditate on the fact that every human being has a spark of godliness in them, has a pure soul in them, and in spite of whatever other layers they may have to their personality, some of which may not be my type and I might not be so interested in, but there's a pure, holy soul underneath. If you meditate on that, then anyone can be lovable. You could love anyone. Even somebody who's quite obnoxious, you'll love them because how sad is it that a pure soul is covered by such an obnoxious personality? And you'll feel a little bit of sorrow for them, and that will cause love. Even an obnoxious person, you can love them as well. It's all in the mindset of that person. And then when it comes to romantic love as well, even romantic love could be developed where it did not exist. Because it could be that the only reason that romantic love didn't develop in the first place was because your mind was not open to it. You didn't have the dart, the awareness to say that this person is not just good, they're actually good for me. What I thought was good for me, I don't know if I know that, but this person is good for me. And when you realize that, then love can start flowing. Okay, any questions, comments?
Well said.
Thank you.
It goes back to the saying where, to always see the good in people.
Mm-hmm.
Is a really great quality.
That's right.
As well.
That's right. That's correct. And a good person more readily sees good in other people. Right? When you're around a good person, you actually behave better. Like when you're around somebody who's very pure, so you act better. So goodness brings out goodness. So when you look for somebody else's goodness, that's a good quality in you, and that brings more goodness, and that makes them more lovable. True.
Don't you think in between the thinking and the feeling, there has to be some sort of action, some sort of doing?
What do you mean? Doing what?
You talked about developing a love for somebody by just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would struggle with that. I think that you'd actually have to start doing things for the person or for yourself and the person in order to really manifest that true emotion.
That's a good point. There's sometimes another reason why you're not feeling for a person. And certainly what I said is not exhaustive of all the possible reasons. There are definitely other reasons why you may have somebody who is good for you, and your feelings don't develop. And that could be that generally your feelings are not activated. Sometimes we're in a state where our feelings, and this, for many possible reasons, our feelings are not alert. Our feelings are not ready to be turned on. It's often because of past pain. If a person has been through pain, and we all have, so the degree to which we've been through pain will be the degree to which we're reluctant to let our feelings go because we don't want to be hurt again. So if we're in such a state, or that's one possibility. Another possibility is just general fear. That fear, not necessarily to be hurt, but fear of the unknown, fear of committing, fear that this is the rest of my life, fear of just taking a step and moving and changing and shaking my boat. There are many fears. Any fear that we have, a fear is a paralyzing energy on our heart, stops us from loving. So if that's what's happening, if it's not our attitude that needs to change, if it's our emotions are just not open, they're clammed up. So one of the best ways out of that is, like you said, to do for somebody else. When you are kind towards somebody, that is more likely to cause you to love them, which is a bit opposite of what people often think. You usually think that if I'm kind to you, you'll love me. No, if I'm kind to you, I'll love you. Kindness to you is good for my love of you. It may or may not affect your love of me, but if I'm kind to you, my kindness brings about love. Because by doing something for you, I'm going out of myself. I'm not being stuck in myself. And as soon as I'm out of myself, that's when I'm open to love you. When I'm stuck in myself, in my own self-absorbed state, so that I'm not really open to love. I'm just protecting myself and fearful. Whereas as soon as I go out of my little bubble and care for you, my heart can open up. So what you said is a very important point, that giving, doing, can arouse feeling. Okay?
That's it's an interesting point. It arouses a feeling, and I can understand the logic and rationalisation of that. But I think there's an antithesis to that, in that you're not loving that person for what they are. You're loving them for what they do for you. Right? I think it's a different form of love. It's not on the same emotive base. Do you know what I mean?
That's if you're on the receiving end of the giving.
No, I'm saying if you're the giver.
Oh, and
right?
yeah.
And you start loving the person. Right?
Right.
I see it as a different entity, really, to the what's the chokhmah and the bina, right? That eventually develops with the da'at. It's a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, there is a danger. There is a danger to giving, and that is that when you're giving, you're in control. You're calling the shots. You're the donor, and they're the recipient. And so there's a certain control that comes with that. So that may be good for your love, but it doesn't necessarily make you lovable when you're giving. Again, counterintuitive. We think that if we give more, we'll be more loved. Sometimes giving more is just being more controlling, and you need to be able to receive to be loved. So when somebody feels that a love is not being reciprocated, I'm doing so much, I'm giving so much, and I'm not getting anything in return. But maybe you haven't left room to get anything in return. You have to be able to receive to be loved. So it's true that you might not be lovable. You may be smothering a person by giving. It may be a selfish thing, giving. You don't usually think of it that way.
I think it often happens with parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when they really indulge a child.
Yeah.
And has a negative impact.
Right. And there it's more likely because it's an unequal relationship.
Yeah.
But then to translate that into an equal relationship and be doting and giving and spoil, but not receive anything, it's a one-way thing, and that will breed a resentment and a distance. Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of this series.
Thank you.